Supervisor Arstead. And I thank you for being able to join. We will start with item number 2, and that's the Pledge of Allegiance. You join me? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And we will proceed. Is anybody have public comment for the executive committee?
No, there's no one here.
All right, we'll move on to item number 4 on the agenda.
I'll move to approve.
Motion by Supervisor Robinson to approve the minutes of the October 10th, 2024 Executive Committee meeting. Is there a
Seconds.
Seconded by Supervisor Fifrick. Any discussion on the minutes as presented in the packet? Seeing none, all those in favor of that motion to approve the October 10th, 2024 Executive Committee meeting minutes signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll move on to possible policy issues and potential committee determination, operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, or policy. And there is none. And we'll move on to item number 7. That's educational presentation and committee discussion. And we will start with item number 7A, and that is discussion on the tax incremental finance legislation changes that were brought as recommendations by the task force. And I thought it would be appropriate to have those discussions here at the executive committee because they may involve multiple other committees, but we have the chairs of each of the standing committees. And so some of those, one in particular of the recommendations was to actually request the legislature to change the makeup of the committee of review and increase the county's participation on that. So I open it, plus other recommendations. So I open it up for discussion from each of the members of the exec committee. Discussion?
Chair Gibbs, this is Supervisor Pfeiffer.
Supervisor Pfeiffer, please, by all means.
I think in sitting through our economic extension meeting a couple weeks ago, it was a lot of good discussion on the subject. I think putting effort into changing and going through the legislature to change the makeup of the Joint Review Board, I don't think that really improves much quality in terms of what we're going to see for a review. There's no guarantee that the additional member is going to have any inside or local knowledge on projects or the development. And I think that what's been set up with the 4 overlying tax jurisdictions, as well as 1 member of the public, I think that makes a nice group that is not only invested from their perspective, but has a good group of knowledge. And they're the ones that are consistently attending these meetings and are the ones that best make the decision. Adding more members only to make it more political, I don't think that's advantageous for the county.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts? John, you're on mute. John, you're still on mute. I didn't know if you wanted to address. You're still on mute. John tries to rectify the technical issues. Any other thoughts? I understand that.
Mr. Chair?
Supervisor Drabek, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just thinking the joint review board to me seems a little lopsided. It seems like it should just be, it seems like it's one way more than it ought to be. That's why I would like to see that maybe changed a little bit. It seems like it just leans towards having TID districts and not the county would be like the only one there that would be maybe not for it. So that's one of the things that I was thinking on that. Thank you.
Okay. You know, the one thing I will say is that the criteria that is spelled out. Let's step back. The 10 questions that are supposed to be addressed that is put out by the Department of Revenue that is supposed to be looked at on each project, especially starting in January 1 of 2025, and also supposed to spell the length of which times a TID or TIF district is open, is really critical. And so I understand the task force looking at the makeup. But I think the bigger thing is the education of the board and the committee when they look at these TIF districts to be able to get some teeth into and the criteria around those 10 questions, because as I understand it, the legislation that changes is now the board, the committee has to determine the length of the maximum length of these TIDs. And when you're starting to see in multiple municipalities throughout Marathon County, where over 20% of their tax base is in TIF districts, the rest of the tax base, taxpayers are paying that. Did you get, John, are you still working on resolving your mute issues? All right.
Mr. Chair, I'd make one more comment if I could.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think that some of the changes I think that you're referencing, 2023 Act 13, which made some significant changes and incentivizes the way that for municipalities to close out districts earlier on, I think is beneficial and will help not only municipalities but the county as well. There's going to be some more changes that are being proposed and talked about as part of the next legislative session as well. I don't think there's anything that's been formally put out there yet that I've heard of, but I've heard a bevy of different possible changes, from the 12% maximum to a number of other timeline issues, including extensions as well. So there's going to be a lot that I think coming up in the next 6-9 months. I think it's important that we stay on that. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I would agree. I mean, if there is going to be some legislation, I think the reason for my bringing it forward here was if there was some specific legislative, if there's going to be legislative change, it's easier to be in the early conversations of that potential legislative makeup. Or legislation makeup than it is after the legislation has been drafted. Sometimes they are willing to change, but they've made up their position, and so that's why I thought that if we're going to be involved, we want to be involved at the base level. So, other thoughts?
Chair Gibbs?
Yes, John, you have it fixed. You're a technical genius. IT specialist.
Took me forever, but I think there were a number of other discussions that took place at the TIF task force, including potentially expanding timeframes to allow for greater review up front, and the methods of notification versus, not relying on legal notices. From a process perspective, I think that there were concerns relative to the total amount of community that can go in and whether or not there should be joint review board, greater involvement in amendments and timeframes. So I don't know how you want to present those, but there wasn't a formal report from the TIF task force, but rather an outline that Dave Overbeck shared with the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee that was incorporated into the joint meeting agenda and materials.
Well, that's you hit it right on the head. Like I said, I know there was several other items that the committee outlined that they thought needed further review, further exploration as to put some teeth into it. So that's why I wanted to bring it to this committee. I'm not sure how we specifically. I know the EEDC committee is taking a look at the 10 questions and trying to frame the criteria around those questions so that when we provide that information to our member on the Joint Review Board, they can ask the pertinent questions as to, okay, is this an item, is this project, financially stable and sound and in the best interest of the taxpayer. I think that's one of the things that, and the if but for provision, I think has been one that has been, in my opinion anyway, in some cases, has been overlooked. Because I don't know that there's any teeth into it. There's teeth if it's utilized, but the fact is that the developer comes in and says, well, no, it won't be developed without the incentives that are being offered by the municipalities, and sometimes that may or may not be the case. But again, so I was looking for direction from this committee.
Chair Gibbs, Supervisor Pfeiffer.
Supervisor Pfeiffer, please.
There's one thing that it's been talked about a little bit, taking the conversation a little bit different is, I don't know how long ago, it's probably 4 or 5 years now, that there was changes made to TID legislation that requires an annual meeting of the Joint Review Board, which I think was a really positive change that was made. In the past, there may be joint review boards that would go years and years without meeting if there was no requirement for amendments. But I'm wondering if there's some way that we can incorporate those annual meetings into some type of report back to whether it's the EEDC or the county board as a whole, so that we can get an annual update on the individual municipalities, as well as what kind of feedback we're getting from that. I think that's a real positive change and something that can provide an educational piece for our county board as a whole.
And I appreciate that. I do agree. I think that a report back and knowing where the successes are and where there's challenges are, but the part that I still struggle with is when we have municipalities continually extending TIFs that are in effect paid off, and then extending it, and I understand that the TIF legislation allows it to create donor TIFs or expand or modify the TIF district to increase the plan, but that's when you get to a situation where TIF districts and municipalities have 20+% of their tax base in a TIF. Because of that, I've seen municipalities get into situations where their normal operating expenses to maintain infrastructure in the non-TID district has to be utilized by borrowing. And so I still think that there's need for review, and I don't disagree that I think reports are absolutely good and provide meaningful information, but the reports doesn't allow us to look at where we are making bad choices or where potential bad choices are being made or continued bad choices are being made. Other thoughts? Any other thoughts?
Maybe if I could just maybe suggest that we circulate Dave Overbeck's report in the PowerPoint, and then
Okay.
maybe have that discussion, because I think Randy, I think he captured that idea in ask for an annual report to the county board relative to the TIDs and their status. I think that would get at it, but I think it would be beneficial to the committees and the chairs and the members of this committee that haven't participated in those discussions at either EEDC or at Human Resources, Finance, and Property.
Okay, so why don't we do this? The next steps will be I will circulate that report to the committee for their review, and we will put this on the agenda for next month to take up and further that discussion. We'll move on then to item number 7B, discussion of the administrator's 2025 work plan. And I will turn it over to Administrator Leonard. The work plan was put into the packet. I think it was in the packet that was initially created for last week, but then I think it was put into the packet just recently today. So if you updated your packet and download the packet, it would be in your packet today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So Administrator Leonard.
Yep, thank you. And just for context, again, what's in your packet is the what I'm titled the December update of the 2024 County Administration Work Plan. I tried to summarize a lot of the information in the progress column, which is on the far right, and then to keep it as short as possible, but then also to highlight the things that have taken place since you last received an update in red. But I recognize the document's rather long, and I think Kim and I were talking before this meeting. It seems as though this is the week where the website has been haunted. We did have my recollection is similar to what Chair Gibbs indicated. Earlier this week, it was in the packet. Then it wasn't, and now Kim put it back in. So if there are questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm not going to go through this document in detail because really the point of the discussion, at least today, is to get you thinking about and perhaps providing some insight today or via email, but certainly then at your next meeting, so we can start to add some flesh to what is the 2025 work plan going to entail. I think there are, as you'll see from the document, there's a lot of projects that still have a bit of carryover that we will have into 2025. Some, of course, I think were completed in earnest, but still have some, what I'll call some process improvement work to move on. But I really want to make sure that I allow for enough time for discussion today and certainly at your next meeting to get guidance from you as to what your priorities are looking forward into 2025. And I've kind of started to put together some thoughts based on some of your recent action as a board and committee discussion on some big ticket areas. But just to quickly go through some of these projects, and I'll organize my comments for 2025 similarly. But from the facilities standpoint, I think a lot of progress is being made by our team. I'm very happy to report that hopefully in the middle of next year, middle of Q2, we should have that Lakeview campus largely completed. I'll change that from a blue arrow to a green check mark with the relocation of those departments. Again, a lot of facilities work to continue, but that is a large project. Similarly with the updating of a master facilities plan, I think that can flow well from that project completion. When we look forward to 2025, however, it really is going to be that work that the board has discussed, and you funded some of it in the budget, which is how do we redevelop or potentially divest those parcels that are no longer occupied by county staff or used for county operations. I just had a meeting today with some local local governmental entities about that, and it's certainly going to be a project. It's not something that the county has a great deal of experience doing. We've acquired property in the past to add it to our property portfolio, but really divesting significant parcels is something we haven't done in a long time. So that'll be a project. Similarly, the Regional Forensic Science Center, a lot of very good progress to this point relative to both the financial side, fundraising, construction, but also recruitment. As I noted, we did have a successful recruitment for the deputy chief position. But as we look toward 2025 and kind of thinking about construction wrapping up in late summer on the site on the NTC campus and look toward opening and operating on that site, there's a lot of things that need to happen in the interim. So that will certainly be a project that will carry over. Everything from engaging the legislature on pursuing some legislation changes that we've talked about to doing a pretty comprehensive budget amendment and reclassification of positions to be able to open and operate that space. So good progress, but a lot more to move forward. The highway shop, similarly, a lot of conversations and presentations to particularly the infrastructure committee, but also HR, finance, and property. The direction given recently is to move forward with authoring an offer to purchase for a potential highway relocation of the Wausau shop. But a lot of work certainly to move forward on that. Again, even an offer to purchase, of course, has to go through the county board approval process. So a lot more work to be done relative to 2025 there. Non-tax deed parcel divestment beyond those that I talked about before, I think we've made a lot of good progress. A couple of CBRF properties have been sold by the county board, which will helps. The idea is to help North Central service debt. Very, very important. We also have a couple other parcels. One sold to the city of Wausau, a parking lot recently at the direction of the board, and then we have one upcoming that we will be closing to be purchased by Habitat for Humanity. I also have continue to have conversations with municipalities, most recently the village of Rib Mountain, about getting rid of some of those what I'll call remnant parcels. And good news, the village is interested in that. So again, a lot of progress made there. The ice arena, I won't belabor this point, but we're really waiting on FEMA to approve a bit of a scope change to update that presentation that we were hoping to have in January or February of this coming year, to assist the board in making some very, very important policy decisions relative to the future of operating those ice arenas on the Marathon Park campus. Certainly they're in need of a lot of repair if we're going to continue doing that, or does the direction can go either two ways. One, we try to exit intelligently from that ice business with the stakeholders being informed and talking that process through with them. Or two, if we are going to stay in that service delivery model, do we maintain the facilities we have and kind of at the service level we have? Or is there a desire, particularly amongst the stakeholders and the county board, to look at a new vision for doing that? I have not made progress on the parking ordinance update as of yet, but other than we've done some preliminary work and what a draft might look like. That said, I am going to be bringing something forward in connection with updating that existing ordinance, and it is an ordinance, which I don't necessarily think is having a robust ordinance relative to parking at the courthouse is necessary. I don't think ordinance is the place for that to live. But I will be bringing forward an ordinance revision once we relocate a number of departments to that Lakeview campus from the courthouse, because again, I think timing is good, but also from a financial perspective, I don't think I'm surprising anyone when I say parking downtown in the ramp. If we can mitigate the need to have that expense, it would be a good thing to do. Budget process, I think, again, went very well. Some things certainly to to improve on relative to process, but from a standpoint of as requested in 2024, to make changes for the 25 process, I think that went well. Sam, certainly a great asset. Her onboarding has gone very well to lead us through that. Fleet, really kind of status quo for now. And we'll evaluate that in connection with the move to Lakeview, because I think there's a greater opportunity for collaboration with some of the other entities that are moving there. The county board, I have received positive feedback relative to the capital improvement plan updates that we've made, but again, that should improve as well with our asset management system implementation that is currently in the kickoff stages right now. Chris was actually attending some meetings today on that. Treatment courts, again, similarly, good feedback from the Public Safety Committee on ultimately the data that they did receive. And I met this morning with the judge that is the chair of the CJCC to talk through what does that cadence of ongoing reporting look like. So positive feedback, I think. Also, we'll keep the committees informed. The direction that I understand from the board is quite clear. Your budget amended those two separate budgets to create essentially one treatment court budget, but the expectation is very clear that we need to make sure the ROI is significant. That is, those courts need to be operating at a much higher capacity relative to census. Relative to procurement, no real progress to report there. There was not an allocation of funds for us to take that in-house and deliver that as a new position. Your budget message to me in terms of priorities was no new levy positions, and there wasn't a readily available non-levy source of funding. Priority-based budgeting or program-based budgeting options, that was not prioritized by the board. Financial projects, again, an area where I think I marked it as complete, but we just met again earlier this week with HR Finance and Property. I think there are a lot of opportunities to continue to grow in terms of our financial reports to standing committees, but also monthly reports to the HR Finance and Property Committee on budget to actual, kind of a rolled up report. Sam's got some drafts there. Similarly with fund balance education, while we checked the box on getting that done, I think I'm still going to have that on my operational plan for moving forward in 25, because there are some process improvement things for us to do relative to compiling that information in a more digestible way for county board. But overall, good discussion.
Lance,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, excuse me, if we go back to the financial related projects, and I'd just like to interject one of the stumbling blocks relative to timely reporting is the whole issue and process of reconciliation. And you want to just talk about how you're dealing with that? I think that's an
Sure.
important issue for committee chairs to understand.
Sure. So that really goes to what I think is one of the primary areas when we look forward to 25 that's going to be on the work plan, and it's a goal Sam, Chris, and I have discussed, and that it goes to the movement toward a centralization of finance. We have in Marathon County operated under what I just term as a generally decentralized finance department, and that, or financial operations. That is, particularly our larger departments have finance professionals that are employees in the truest sense of those individual departments. So whether it's the sheriff's office, whether it's the health department, social services, conservation, planning and zoning, parks, our larger departments have those finance professionals there. And what that has allowed for, certainly it's a positive in terms of specific training for the individual professionals within the departments, but it has resulted in, and this is my characterization, where we have slightly different ways of doing things and slightly different priorities depending on what department those financial professionals are in. The goal is to centralize that from a training, onboarding standpoint, also from a a policy standpoint and a practice standpoint, to Committee Chair Robinson's point, reconciliation, just really ensuring that we actually have a process where when there is month end, we all have the same approach to what is month end. When do we actually close out a month from a financial reporting standpoint, whereby if you need to make a change or account for a receivable, you're doing that the same way, as opposed to essentially reopening that month and going back and adding those things. And why is that important is because, to Supervisor Robinson's point, it makes reconciliation a bit of a challenge. So that is one thing that, Sam, if you look to the last HR Finance and Property packet, we've been talking about how to make some modifications to address general issues that are highlighted within the audit. And these are not new issues, I want to be very clear, and they're also not unique to Marathon County. They're issues that, if you've read governmental audits for other organizations or even nonprofit audits, if you serve on any of those boards, they're very common, but they are things that we can do better. And consistency relative to reconciliation and month end is one of those. So Sam has put together, we drafted a memo that kind of outlined what in 25 we're going to be trying to tackle in terms of training, which should ultimately make the audit for the 2025 year. It'll help also in 24, but it'll really, you'll see it in the 2025 audit, hopefully, in terms of some of the verbiage, that it's certainly worded differently and that we've made some improvements. But reconciliation is one of those areas where, through consistent training and that path to centralization, I think we can just, quite honestly, just get better and get on more on the same page, which will help us immensely as audit is happening. I don't know, Supervisor Robinson, if there was anything else you wanted to cover there?
Well, I just wanted to make sure that we highlighted it, because the reconciliation really is what generates those monthly reports that people have been asking for.
Right.
So I think it's important that we all understand that while we are somewhat independent, we're trying to become uniform, and whatever committees can do relative to departments under their jurisdiction to ensure timely reconciliation is important.
Right. I think well said. And that's departmental reconciliations, but then also I think Sam has made a lot of progress in trying to, it's not unique again here, but it's certainly something. Where does the line between the work that's done in the finance department, where does that line end, and where does the line begin of what is the responsibility of the treasurer's office? I think Sam has done well to try to articulate what that is, and where we can bring resources to the treasurer's office to help them on that reconciliation, that bank reconciliation work that they need to do. But certainly a big undertaking, and if you do look to the HR Finance and Property packet from earlier this week, there's again a summary memo of what some of those steps are going to look like. But centralization of finance that is going to be a big piece of 25, and it's not something that's going to be accomplished in 2025. But if you think about our finance department right now of 6 people, compared to other county finance departments, and speaking with my colleagues where they have 16 people, we have more than 16 people doing finance work across Marathon County. But like I said, they live in the individual departments, and I don't think that's going to change. It's just that the relationship with finance needs to be different. The expectation, the expectation relative to onboarding, I think it's asking a lot of a department to onboard a finance professional when, Lori's in the room, and they hired a finance professional recently, but there's only one real finance person in conservation planning and zoning. So when that person leaves, really, who's best suited to onboard that person it should be a finance task, and we're working toward that. But it will certainly be a longer project. Similarly to fund balance, I think kind of that idea of centralizing finance and developing a common set of definitions. I know you all received a memo in connection with the budget that we put together. Sam put together the memo, and then I had a summary email to distribute it. I think that's going to be our basis from which we develop a short booklet that does lay out what are our funds, what are they used for, how does money find its way into the fund, how does it find its way out, what are all the definitions of what's the difference between restricted or assigned, all those pieces, so that it's not as though each and every time when we do this education, it's the first time. So we'll be working on that in 25 as well. The next several projects I think are going to be crossed off the list here. I don't think we need to talk much more about our ERP system in terms of implementation. We have a lot of work to do moving forward with it, but I don't know that there's a lot of value or need to engage the board on the project. Similarly, ARPA, in light of your board action recently, it's really just closing out all those ARPA projects in accordance with the Treasury guidance, and we can provide a summary report to you when that kind of throughout the process, but it's really not going to be, at least from my perspective, as active a project as it has been. Addressing the tax delinquent parcels, I think we've made a lot of good progress recently. I won't go into detail here, but we did start actually taking through the first wave of properties earlier this year. Took ultimately 18. We started with 50, but ultimately 18 were taken. The second wave is kind of in process for tax foreclosure via in-rem. But in addition to that, at the direction of HR Finance and Property, we communicated with over 1,000, relative to 1,000 parcels that had delinquent taxes, past due balances, that is, that not necessarily from this year's taxes or the previous years, but it could go all the way back to 2014. We sent out independent mailings, and we have been, I think it's gone very well. That was kind of spearheaded by administration, but also working with the other departments. And just today, I stopped by the treasurer's office, and someone stopped by to make a payment on $38,000 of back taxes. So relatively small project, but I think it's having some significant effort, and we'll continue that. Parks projects, this has been an ongoing issue that an ongoing desire to have a more of a stable funding stream for future capital projects. I'm working with Jamie to kind of add some flesh to that and bring something back to the committee. I don't see that going away in terms of a project, but again, I don't know if it's a real item of high priority for the board. Opioid funding, that's not going away. We don't have a strategy as of yet. I just met this morning with we had our CJCC, Criminal Justice Coordinating Council meeting, and I got some insight from that group, from the executive committee, I should say, on next steps. Conduit bonding, I think we can call that one largely complete. But I do think, and if Committee Chair Robinson wants to add, certainly please do, but I do think it makes sense to amend our conduit bonding ordinance, and we can hopefully take that up in 2025 as I prepared a couple of draft amendments for consideration, but just haven't closed that yet.
I would agree. I think it's more of a committee function than administration right now.
Broadband, I would say the same thing with kind of where we are and the funding streams that the county had access to, really in light of the BEAD Broadband Equity Access Deployment Act is really the next thing, and we'll wait and see what support is needed. Big progress on HR-related issues. Our on-site clinic provider change is a big, we've gotten so much good feedback thus far. It really, I think, is going to serve the county very well from an an employee retention and recruiting standpoint, but also from strictly a fiscal standpoint. I think the expectation from myself and HR leadership is that we will see strong improvement in terms of financial indicators. So we'll provide some updates to HR Finance. That's going to be one of the goals for 25, is to get some reporting similar to that monthly reporting for rolled up budget to actuals for departments, but do the same thing, have some standard cadence relative to reporting on our clinic utilization and ROI. I don't know if there's anything else on the HR or intergovernmental projects that I really want to highlight, but I did want to make sure that we have time to talk about 2025, and as I start to put together the work plan, the draft work plan, a lot of the things, as I already indicated, will be carryover, but there are some very specific new pieces that I want to call out. I already referenced the audit. From a bandwidth standpoint within administration, I think one of the most important projects we need to move forward on is going to be the property-related projects relative to redevelopment or redeployment of the River Drive and Thomas Street properties. But at the same time, looking at the Regional Forensic Science Center, that project is going to wrap up in terms of construction in July. But that's starting an entirely new department from a standpoint of scope. So that is one of those things on my list that is near the top. Similarly, with the assisting the HR Finance and Property Committee and the Infrastructure Committee on evaluating the revenue stream, or I'll call it the capital stack for maintaining your roadway infrastructure. How does the vehicle registration fee, tax levy, or potentially borrowing, what is the county's long-term strategy in connection with your budget discussions this year? That vehicle registration fee certainly was kind of central, at least in some ways, to that conversation, and I think that is going to need some substantial assistance from staff to assist the board in getting the information it needs. So those are some things that have already kind of risen to the top in my book, but I certainly want to make sure if I'm missing anything that I incorporate it into that work plan. And ultimately, Mr. Chair Gibbs, I think I would kind of vote in favor of, not that I get a vote on this committee, but vote in favor of a process where you guys, again, prioritize where you want staff time to go. It was very helpful when we did that last time. We didn't cross off a lot of things from a prioritization standpoint, but we did move some to the lower priority level. And I haven't even brought up the UW yet, which is one of those things I know that's taken a fair amount of time and will probably be more reactionary than anyone on this committee wants. But there are some things from a proactive standpoint that Supervisor Marash and Supervisor Robinson have served on the Chancellor's work group, that I think there are some things that we should, from a proactive standpoint, also address. But ultimately, my time is spent at the pleasure of the board to the things that matter to you. So my plan is to just do a rollover of the things that, as I laid out in the 2024 update, still need board engagement, but then also if there are things that you want added, I'd be happy to hear those things now and try to get them on that draft document.
Well, thank you, Administrator Leonard. I think you hit on some of the key things that I think, the continued development and pursuit on the highway shop understanding the funding stream necessary to maintain the highway system, the continued possibly brought back of the CAFR in the audit, and then redevelopment of the properties. And then also the UW, and then, like you said, the Regional Forensic Science Center is a totally new department, or at least a new enterprise, and that is going to need, some additional attention. So what I would like to see is, the rollover of the projects that are not done, at least in a list, along with at least these items and any others that may be brought forward from the executive committee, and put in a list, and then we'll send that out to the executive committee to prioritize, ask them to prioritize in their priorities, and then we can have that, we can provide that priority list back to you, because I think it is important to understand that the list that we have, and we've got to be realistic in expectations, and that is the list is extensive. Some of those projects are going to be need minimal administration oversight, but some of them are going to need extensive administrative oversight, and we have to be cognizant of the capacity that administration has, because just the day-to-day operations of the county takes up 80% of your time, and so I'll open it up for other comments by other members on the exec committee, or other items that you want to be added to the list, so that we can prioritize them.
Chair Gibbs?
Supervisor Robinson, please go ahead.
I'd like to, suggest that we put in, as part of the work plan, filling the vacant facilities capital improvements department head position, as well as the administrative assistant in the administrator's office. Those have, I think, fallen back, but I think they're critical for a work-life balance for the administrator, but also important for the county board in our functioning. So I'd like to make sure that we prioritize those activities so that we can enhance our administrative capabilities and support.
I would be remiss if I didn't let the executive committee know that I had that very discussion with the administrator this week, that the administrative assistant to the administrator, that position needed to get posted, and so they're working on some of the rewrite in the job classification, and then also talked about that specifically on the facilities manager. So yes, I agree with you. But because it does affect, obviously, capacity and the board's ability to function. Other comments, other thoughts? All right. So again, I will work with the administrator to get that list and develop that list, get that out to the executive committee for their prioritization, and then brought back to this committee to develop into the 2025 work plan. That leads us to number 7C, and that's discussion on the administrator's evaluation process. So I just wanted to remind, I put this on the agenda to remind the committee what our board rules call for. So in the first year of the 2-year term of supervisor, the administrator's eval is 100% responsibility of the executive committee. So I will be forwarding out, or I will have the Corp Council forward out to each of you the administrator's eval. We do look as to the items on the work plan and how successful the completion of that work plan and some of those items on that work plan were. And then there's also other items of criteria that we use to review the administrator's performance. That once that is sent out to each individual, I request that you forward that information, your completed report, your completed eval, back to the Corp Counsel, Michael Purner. He will compile that, and therefore it's not me compiling it and trying to regardless, it's independent that is brought forward as far as the summary. We will then take that summary into closed session, review it. If there's any input during that closed session, changes that want to be made to the summary, and then we'll provide that summary and the eval to the administrator in January or February. So more than likely in February. So I just wanted to put this on your radar that the eval will be coming out from me or from Michael Purner to take care of and have you review that and then send it back to Michael for his compilation. Any questions on the administrator's eval process? And just so everybody knows, the second year of the 2-year term, then we poll the full board on his eval and bury that information also into the summary of the eval. So the first year it is exclusively the executive committee. The second year it is the full board. Any other questions on that item? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 7D, a discussion on Chapter 2 and Chapter 5 of the Marathon County Comprehensive Plan. And we have with us the CPZ Director, Lori Miskimmons, and I believe we also have one of the planners, Jeff Pritchard, but I also believe we may have someone from North Central Regional Planning. So I will turn it over to Ms. Kimmons. Lori, the floor is yours. Please.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. Yeah, we do have Jeff Pritchard on the line, and we also have Dennis Lawrence from the Regional Planning Commission here. I'm going to turn it over to Dennis in a second to walk through the changes to Chapter 2 and Chapter 5. I just wanted to start for the committee by pulling up the timeline just to kind of remind folks where we're at. So we are starting to dig into the chapters of our 2016 plan, taking somewhere between 2 and 3 chapters at each executive committee. We're targeting bringing them to you about every other month. Depending on how that goes, we might have to do some every month if we need more time or have to do a lot more edits and bring them back and stuff. So over the last month, we tackled the demographic Chapter 2, demographic information, and Chapter 5, the natural resources chapter. And in doing that, we engaged CPZ, parks, and solid waste, since those are the 3 chapters that are most covered within the natural resources Chapter 5. So we did get a chance to sit down with them and discuss the information in the chapter and identify where we needed to make updates, if the objectives were still relative, and what some of the emerging issues they saw from the department level. We then also went to the Environmental Resources Committee with Chapter 5 to discuss with them those same topics. And today we're bringing it to you, the Executive Committee, to first run you through the changes we believe we need to make, and then open it up for comment and discussion on other things that might need to be included. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dennis.
Sure, great. Yeah, I think Lori provided a pretty good overview. Just maybe a little bit of more background on the timeline. I mean, it is a relatively aggressive timeline, I would say. I mean, we're in December right now, and we're looking at the first couple of chapters. The anticipation is that by October of next year, so about 10 months away, we're going to have a full kind of final document for your review, and then it'll kind of go through that review and adoption process. So that is kind of where we're at. Like Lori said, there's several chapters that are going to be coming up as we move forward. The timeline suggests what we might be doing. I'm not sure if those will be exactly the timeline that we'll be following in terms of which are on any given month. But what we intend to do really today and with future meetings is this is really the first review, if you will, more to get comment than really look at the specifics. I think we will have, like I said, a review document as we move into next year. Really what we want to do is just kind of hit on the highlights and really talk about some of the issues and maybe some of the emerging things that we need to incorporate into these chapters. So that's kind of what we hope to do as we kind of update the comprehensive plan. But as far as Chapter 2, Lori does have it on the first page. This is really kind of the demographic chapter. I mean, this really kind of just sets the stage, if you will, kind of provides a lot of background information, some trend analysis and projections. A lot of this stuff I'm sure all of you are pretty aware of. We don't need to go into great detail. I would say there's a variety of things still within this. It is a working draft, so there's a couple of parts that we're still waiting for some projections from the state so we can get that part updated. But some of the data I think is worthwhile just taking a quick look at. I think if you look kind of at the first page, not to push back, but the first page really kind of takes a look at, and I think this is really interesting, I mean, just from a planning perspective, kind of a comparison to what's going on with our neighboring counties and Marathon County. As you can see, Marathon County has been doing incredibly well. I mean, almost 10% growth over the last 20 years. We look at our neighboring counties, we see substantially less growth, and in some cases, a declining in population. As you know, Marathon County probably serves as a magnet for our region. A lot of folks leaving those counties are coming here to some degree, but I think that puts us at certainly a competitive advantage. And we're pacing pretty close to the state. From a national perspective, we're probably behind, I think, over that 20-year trend. The nation grew at about 15%, so not quite as strong as the nation, but certainly competitive at the state level in terms of growth. Some of the other tables here on the next page kind of just reiterate that. The one thing I would mention is that we're seeing, and as you well know, there's a housing demand in the county. We're seeing a decline in the household size. We just have, smaller family sizes, more single folks, people without children or fewer children. It's just driving that number down. And as the population increases, we not only need to provide housing for that, but also the smaller household sizes, creating additional demand. So those would really be a couple of the important things from kind of the population side of it. We do talk a little bit about racial composition, and we do sort of break down by population groups things within the county on page 4. There's a pretty good table, and I think that really provides a lot of just detailed information in terms of what the county looks like. We kind of have, under 5, the 5 to 17 cohorts and so on there as you look at, it'd be at the top of page 4.
Oh, sorry.
There we go, right there. Yep. So that kind of gives us a sort of a percentage of where we're at. I think the first takeaway from this is we look from kind of that 20-year trend, we're seeing less youth, less young people, which I think is probably no surprise, and increasing in those older age groups, particularly the 65 and over. You kind of see the median age has been increasing. So those types of things just kind of give us a sense of what the mix is in terms of the county, and these obviously are things we need to plan for as we move into the future. The bottom of that page, we have a table on education. I think county versus state, we're pretty comparable in terms of high school participation, graduates, as well as bachelor degrees. I mean, a couple of percent different here and there, but by and large, pretty similar. There's a pretty good breakdown there, provides some background information there. The next couple of pages, we're really waiting for some projection data. As we move into page 6 and 7, as some of you may know, the Department of Administration does statewide projections, and they have been promising us by the end of this year we would have them, and we're fast approaching the end of the year, and we still don't have them, but we anticipate them hopefully sometime soon. So these next few pages would be updated to incorporate sort of that new projection data. As we move toward the sort of the back part of this chapter, we've incorporated the 6 regions, which kind of relates to, starting on page 8, which relates to some of the farmland preservation things. We're trying to incorporate some of that into this because the farmland preservation plan is really part of the comprehensive plan and vice versa. So we need to kind of maintain some consistency there. You will notice there's a couple of highlighted things in yellow in the chapter that you have there. Those are things we're still working on, some of the data, because we have to split the county apart and then put it back together by the regions as defined by Marathon County as opposed to census. We just need to do some additional calculations there, so that's why there are some highlights there. So those will all be cleaned up as we move forward, and when you see it next time as sort of the final document. Is that
Kurt, do you want questions as we're going through or at the end?
whatever you would like to do? I guess we can certainly take the question now, John.
But I just had a question, in this area, we're using the farmland preservation regions, but I don't know that those necessarily have any application outside of farmland preservation. Some of the community bundles don't make sense. And I wonder if there's any flexibility in us looking at some of those. You've got Gunther in with Wausau, the central area, and I think Weston's outside the village of Weston. Are there opportunities for us to tinker with those boundaries?
Yep.
I'm thinking aligning it more with the MPO and other things where there's 208 boundaries in common and other things if we're looking at it from a planning tool perspective.
Yeah, I think there are certainly different ways we could mix and match these. And I think even back when we did this originally as part of the comprehensive plan, a decade ago, I think there was some discussion of, how do we best massage these? I guess I would defer to Lori in terms of if we want to maintain that consistency with the farmland preservation plan for that. I think that that's something that, we could certainly make modification to if we want to, or I guess I'll let Lori respond.
Yeah, I understand the history, Dennis, the same way you do, is that there was some discussion in 2016, and I think they did want that consistency with the farmland preservation plan, but if that isn't the feeling this time around, I think we could look at different boundaries, so. Jeff, I don't know if you want to add anything to that since I know you were here as part of the plan in 2016 as well. So.
Yeah, I would agree with John, and I struggled with that the last time we did this plan because you've got some gray areas there. So it may be necessary that if we do modify those sub-regions within the county that we've identified, that we may have to go back and modify the farmland preservation just as a minor update to make sure it reflects what's been changed so that they both match. I think DADCAP will find that to be pretty important. And the reality is we even have to sign a document that the Farm Pres plan supersedes the comprehensive plan. So we may have to modify both documents so it's reflective.
Yeah. And I think I would probably agree with Jeff in terms of that from a consistency standpoint, I think you would want them to be the same. And I think, if you would modify it here, you would likely have to do a modification as part of that farmland preservation plan. And I would say, I think the purpose of it in context of the comp plan is that basically it's part of the farmland preservation plan. I think the discussion is, are these regions something that the county would do any additional planning at? And I think if that was the case, then yes, there probably should be a more thorough examination of how you develop or put these all into different groups. But as it stands, it matches with the farmland preservation plan. It probably is easiest to leave it the way it is right now, unless there's some thoughts of these regions becoming more of a, planning districts or service delivery areas within the county.
Well, that was really what my question back to John would have been is more specifically, and I understand, the potential consistency with the MPO and planning of the infrastructure. However, I think the MPO does its own plan. So I don't know, is there other rationale, other reasons that we want to change the the grouping? And if so, what are those rationales? Does that then trump the fact that we need to update the Farmland Preservation Plan along with this? I guess I throw it out for question.
I would just comment, I don't know that we know at this time, but we've got clearly 208 service area boundaries that aren't reflected in the farmland preservation zones. And I think we're trying to work on, and now Randy is now head of the MPO, but looking at how do we coordinate water resources, wellhead protection ordinances and other things. And I just wonder, particularly in the immediate Wausau urban area, how many properties and parcels and farms we have enrolled in the farmland preservation zoning program, where they're taking advantage of the credits. I would hazard to think that it's probably relatively few in some of those. And we've changed. You're going to need to update that section to reflect the Village of Maine versus the Village of Brokaw and some of the other incorporations relative to Rib Mountain. So there's some editing that needs to occur in there. But if we're looking at it as a planning tool, I think I'd like to know how we can look at the comprehensive plan to deal with some of those other areas. We talked about POUTs, but we also have, we've been talking about water quality and quantity. And I think that's an area where we'll have to look when we're preparing the plan on how we can address those areas. And I just would like to leave those definitions open until we get at some of those sections and the recommendations and the objectives.
But I guess I'd hesitate on leaving it open. I don't have a problem leaving it open, but the further that we go into development, the more work that we'd have to undo to redo if we're going to change those. So I think we need to, if we're going to change them, I think we need to seriously think about changing them up front. Rather than wait too long to change them, because then we have to redo those whole areas that have been defined. And I guess I would ask the planners, Jeff.
Thank you. Just to add on to what John was saying, in terms of the 208 and 201 facilities planning, that's regarding sanitary sewer. We have 2 wastewater treatment plants that are within the MPO area. That would be the city of Wausau and then the Rib Mountain treatment facility. All other villages, cities that contribute waste to those 2 treatment plants are what would be considered secondary designated management agencies. Some of the towns that are on the periphery that were in the question aren't designated or planned to be served by sanitary sewers. Weston probably has the most growth regarding that, as well as Rib Mountain. And the MPO's different kind of animal too, in terms of that's geared primarily toward transportation planning. And then the Farm Pres obviously is geared toward the preservation of priority soils and farmland for protection. And in terms of property owners that are participating within the Farm Pres, they actually have a contract with the state. We only have 7 counties within the entire county that are participating in farm preservation planning. So we've got some legwork to do, if you will, in terms of trying to promote that type of program. and it's a tough sell. It's not. You would think people would really want to participate in that, being if you're a farmer, but for some reason it's just a tough sell yet.
Okay, other questions? Okay, we can go back and proceed.
Okay, good. And really, that sort of concludes the review of that first, or I guess, Chapter 2 of the demographics. Like I said, those 6 regions we're still kind of working to kind of finalize the data. Like John mentioned, there's been some incorporations and some other things that we're still kind of mixing and matching here to get those areas to be consistent. So that would be all I had related to Chapter 2.
In terms of the demographics, as the housing units get smaller and we get older, I assume later in the plan we will again be addressing the issues of density and changing demands for services and other things, and what implications that might have in the county.
Yep, that's a good point, John. Yes, a lot of this data, you will see it again when we get into some of those topical chapters when we're talking about housing or economic development or transportation. So a lot of this information kind of, like I said, sets the stage up front just to give the reader a feel for what is in the county at this point. But then we'll take a lot of this information that we learn from that demographic review and then apply it to those different topics as we move forward. So I guess with that, we'll move on to Chapter 5. Like Lori said, we kind of took this chapter, again, these are out of order, only because we knew that CPZ was able to kind of put some time into this to do kind of the initial review. As you know, one of the things we're trying to do is, one, not only update, but maybe streamline the plan a bit. We were hoping that as the departments had a chance to take a look at these various chapters, we could do both of those things. So that's kind of how we brought this one forward. Plus, we didn't think we'd see a lot of change in just the background information related to natural resources. So that's kind of how we ended up with this chapter here coming up. It really begins with kind of what we call previous plans and studies. This is kind of taking a look at the different things that the county has done. We don't necessarily want to take all the information from every other plan the county has put together over the years and put it into this. So we just sort of identify it by reference and maybe just pull out some of the key factors that we want to mention here as it kind of applies to the comprehensive plan. So you can see that we've got the land and water management plan, the most recent farmland preservation plan, the forest comprehensive land use plan. A lot of these documents that have been done, again, are referenced here. There is the recent solid waste strategic plan, which we'll be incorporating into this since we thought that was important, and then we still have some reference to the land legacy report, which sort of talks a little bit about the natural resources of the county. And then we kind of go into these kind of sub areas, if you will, related to natural resources. So we talk a little bit about the air resources, climate and air quality, a little bit about, land resources, the terrain, depth bedrock, all those types of things. Again, most of this is not drastically different than what we would have seen in the last comprehensive plan. So a lot of this is pretty similar to what you've seen before. We do talk a little bit about soil resources as well. I know there's some information that we need to incorporate here in Table 1, which is on page 9 of this chapter. We're trying to get that updated. We only have it through 2014, but I think we have about another decade of data that we'll be presenting in this 4-year review next time. And then we kind of conclude with mining, both non-metallic and metallic mining. We did make a little adjustment in the metallic mining. As you know, there's still exploratory interest in the Reef deposit here in Marathon County. We know that the DNR is doing at least some additional review of some information requests from, so we just sort of made that reference there. But that might be an emerging issue, if you will, as part of the comprehensive plan. We do talk about farmland resources. The state statute requires that we kind of at least bring some of that farmland preservation information back to the plan here in the natural resources chapter. So on page 12, we've got really a table and a figure here, which I think are kind of interesting to take a look at. I know in particular, as we kind of look at the 10-year trend from 2012 to 22 related to farm size, you can see that generally we're seeing consolidation of some of the larger farms, but then a reduction in some of the mid-sized farms. Was that a question? Oh, okay. All right.
No, Dennis, I think somebody.
Okay, yep. But I think, over that period of time, we're seeing about 200 farms lost. Most of those probably have been merged into some larger farms, thus the numbers change. But you kind of see that we're kind of those mid-size farms, the 50 to 179 and the 180 to 500 acres. We're seeing declines in those, which probably maybe gets to viability of some of the farming sector within the county itself. And we do see some growth in some of the mega farms, but not incredible explosion of growth, but certainly we do see some growth in the size of farms there. So I thought that was kind of a interesting thing to point out. And then if we look at the next page, I think there's a section we're going to be adding here. I know the discussion of wind, solar, and other renewables related to natural gas, things like that. This is something that we're going to be adding some text related to. I think there are issues, as you well know, there's been different proposals at the town level related to wind in particular, but certainly solar is an issue. We've got state siting procedures that we can't really make a lot of change to, but that's certainly an issue that we need to at least provide some information of the plan, because I think it, from a planning perspective, it's an issue that we need to make sure that we're providing some background to and maybe trying to come up with some possible solutions to some of that. And then we kind of conclude with a little, biological vegetation. I mean, a lot of things that are pretty similar to what we've seen in the last plan itself. And then we get to the issues, and I think we've identified a few issues here that really were identified as part of the previous comp plan, and that I think Lori had left sort of some bullets at the end of this chapter for conversation in particular today, just to see what other issues are probably important enough for us to incorporate into the document itself. So I think Lori is going to kind of take over at this point.
Yeah, I'll just say briefly, and then I'll open it up for discussion. When we looked at the issues that were highlighted in 2016 with the departments and with ERC, I think we found that most of the information still stands, but we're seeing some expansion or some difference or some more information that needs to be brought in as it relates to those issues. In particular, we talked about something needs to be identified about the expansion of the interest of wind and solar development in our county and how that may impact our prime soils. And so we think something to that degree needs to be brought into the chapter. We talked with the county forester and at ERC about the potential for the use of county forest lands in other county operations or functions. This is a very recent conversation, including recently the solid waste department had reached out to parks about starting to explore the idea of whether or not we could get clay from a county forest to assist with some solid waste operations. So that discussion started recently at the Solid Waste Management Board, and I know they're going to explore what that process looks like, but just something to keep in mind. And then there was a lot of discussion related to climate changes and how those are, and what implications those are to our county and natural resources. And it was really from that perspective of, we know the weather patterns are changing, and how is that impacting our programs and processes within the county. We talked about that we're seeing changes in how and when our winter timber sales can happen. We're also seeing changes in how our county forests are being used. That might be something that's a little more addressed in the recreational chapter versus this chapter, but we have a placeholder right now in natural resources related to that. In CPZ, we're getting additional guidance and new guidance from the state in terms of how we design our conservation practices, and the same, I think, for highways in terms of engineering design standards to prepare for, say, larger rain events and things like that. And then we expect that, you know, our landowners within the county are also going to continue to see changes in insurance coverage and costs. And we're also anticipating, as the climate changes, our species and species distribution will change within the county, and that might also bring along challenges related to diseases and invasive species. So those were the issues we discussed with the three departments that sort of have help implement the natural resources chapter, and with the ERC. So we wanted to open that up to the executive committee as well to discuss what else we might need to address. The one thing I did want to add for people who aren't as familiar with the comprehensive plan, or if this is their first time through, we do have a separate water resources chapter. So I think that's important to point out. We do not address, or we address very little about water within this chapter because we have a separate chapter devoted to that. And so I just wanted to make sure that people were aware of that.
We do reference here the other chapter that has water in it, correct, Lori? I mean, at some point?
It actually, in the document, I believe it follows directly. It goes from the natural resources to the water resources chapter. Originally, we did want to try and tackle both chapters in the edits at once, but we're still working with and getting some of that data related to our groundwater plan. So we needed a little bit more time before we could get that ready to bring it into the water resources chapter. So that's why we moved that on the schedule. So.
Okay, thank you, Lori. I'll open it up for questions, comments, input, and others.
Chair Gibbs, Supervisor Pfeiffer.
Supervisor Fyrick, please.
So just going back to the forestry piece, I think that's an interesting thing. And looking at the diversity of our county forests, you don't have to go too far south from Marathon County to see some real big issues caused by oak wilt. We have oak wilt within the county as well. That's not very far from our county forests. So I think that's something that we need to keep on our mind as you can see the southern central Wisconsin, what emerald ash borer has done, taking forests completely and just degrading them to look like something out of the apocalypse in some points. The other question I had was probably for Dennis on a data point, talking about farms and the number of larger farms, smaller farms. Do we have any data on total farm acreage that's being utilized? I understand there's some shift away from the middle size, but is that being picked up by the larger farms, or can you speak to that, or is that some data can be included in the plan on that?
Yeah, I think, Randy, we are looking at that right now. I think we have, just from air photo interpretation and some of the land use information, we can kind of look at the number of acres that are still under, row crops and all of that type of thing. We will incorporate something. We're just trying to figure out exactly how we can present that, but we hopefully will address that to some degree.
As a follow-up,
Go ahead, John.
On your renewable natural gas, I assume that you're going to be looking at the manure digesters and what the roles those play in that discussion, or not?
Correct. That's correct,
Okay.
John.
Which correlates also with water quality and others.
Other comments, other thoughts?
Yeah. Mr. Chair?
Supervisor Drabeck,
Mr.
please.
Chair? Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering on the well water testing, will that be in a different chapter then? are and where that would be going with that? Just
Yeah,
wondering.
so we do hope to incorporate the groundwater, well water sampling into the water resources chapter, chapter 6.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Other comments? Well, I will be, I would say that we are on the right track. I mean, the question really always becomes, when you start to and update a plan of this magnitude, getting data in at the right time to be able to incorporate it consistent with the what our timeline was might be challenging. And as I reached out to Lori after reading one of the pages, and I says, this sentence doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and it's because, and it's highlighted, obviously, that we don't have the updated data yet. So I think it's going to be incumbent upon us to, when we do the review, is to ensure that we are consistent throughout. So I thank you for all your efforts. Any other comments?
Chair Gibbs, I would just add, if anyone has any additional questions or comments about these 2 chapters, please feel free to email me. So, because we're going to keep working on them. So, and we're working on them right now. So if you have any ideas, please send them our way. So.
Absolutely. I always encourage the board to reach out to Lori if there's concerns or you have some updates that you want to at least look at and have discussion about. So with that, we are down to the next, and thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Lori, for all of your dedicated work on the comprehensive plan update. And we'll move on to item 8, next committee meeting, January 16th at 3 p.m. Committee members are asked to bring ideas for future discussion. As next month, we will have several things. We'll have hopefully the administrator's review. And we'll also have a review of the TIF financing potential discussion, and we will move on. Anything else for the good of the order? Down to item number 9. What is your pleasure?
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Supervisor Robinson, seconded by Supervisor Arstead to adjourn. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great evening. And again, everyone, please have a happy holiday season, and we will see you in the new year. Thank you.
Same to you.
Thank you, Chair.